Ms. Jones McLeod. Ms. McGee.
Present.
Ms. McQueen. Dr. Morrison. Ms. Parker.
Here.
Ms. Sakayama. Ms. Scriber. Ms. Shotwell. Dr. Starks Turner. Ms. Stevens.
Here.
Ms. Lewis Senior.
Here.
And Ms. Williams.
Here. Thank you so much. Do we have any public comments tonight?
No public comments.
Great. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the November 30th CCB meeting.
Oh.
Thank you. A brief second.
Mhm.
Awesome. In favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing no opposition, we have approved the minutes. Yay, we got our first business. So there's a few things that we're doing tonight. I'm so excited for Miss Parker and what they're going to be presenting to us tonight. But before we do that, we wanted to talk about outlines of student voice. It feels weird to not check in first and say, how are you doing? How's everybody doing? But we put a circle at the end tonight because of what we're going to talk about with behavior education plan. So I still have to do it, you all. But can we please just go around and say your name and one word for how you're feeling tonight? Start over here, please.
Sure. My name is Carla Williams. Tonight I'm feeling hopeful. Linda Parker, mics, please. Oh. Linda Parker, optimistic.
Karen Grimes, feeling great. Susan Stevens, feeling balanced. Kaylee Villasenor, feeling hungry.
Lincoln Chandler, feeling inquisitive. Jacob Hughes, feeling nurtured.
Andrew Newman, the interim executive director of special education, feeling tired.
Janelle Smith, feeling intrigued.
Give me 5 months, radiant.
Raquel McGee, grateful.
We're kind of tired, but ready.
Gina Harris, grateful.
Curtis Deeds, satisfied.
Lasagna Applewhite. Exhausted. Lisa Ellis. Blessed.
We're saying delightful.
So thank you all so much for being here tonight. So grateful we have a forum tonight. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the outline of the student voice. So Ms. Parker, Dr. Applewhite and I, we met to look at all the notes of all the questions that everyone looked at, and the consensus around the questions were questions 4 and 11, most popular questions. So here's what we're asking you all to do. We're asking everyone who said that they could to go to a club or meet with a group of students and ask them those 2 questions and bring that feedback back to CCB. In addition to that, the April meeting, which will be my last meeting as the chair of CCB, the April meeting is going to be a panel with students, and so we want to invite a representative from those different spaces to come and be on our panel. And we'll go over the questions again to make sure that we're getting the information that we need as it pertains to some of our charges, right? The behavior education plan, as well as some of the climate and culture activities in the building. So what we're asking you to do is to reach out to Lisa if you have the availability and the willingness to meet with the group. Our fabulous student representative that's here. If you have other students that you know, please let us know. Let us know. And we want to just what the goal for this whole piece was, how can we get some street data, student voice information? And we looked at the files, we looked at the questions, so we're excited to have that, to bring that information back today. Did you have anything?
No, and we purposely, well, just one thing, we purposely picked only those 2 questions so that we don't overwhelm in the spaces that we go, but we get a chance to hear back from them on those things. So feel free to still listen within the conversation. You don't have to ask these and then leave, but just know that was the purpose for having a few questions versus many.
Yeah, and if you know what groups that you planning on attending or visiting, if you guys can email me so I can reach out to that sponsor to let them know where you're coming. And they can give me some dates that the group is not really too busy and you guys are, welcome to come.
And that will go out in an email to the members of the committee, so that the members of the committee who are not here have the opportunity to do that too, because I'm thinking of a few who aren't here who definitely said they want. Okay, thank you. And I want to thank you Breathe in advance for covering me on March 8th. I cannot be here that night. I have a previous engagement. So Breathe is going to cover that meeting, but we're going to be talking about student safety. So, and we really want to hear, when we had a conversation, Linda and Dr. Applewhite and I had a conversation about student safety, part of that conversation is like, everyone has a different perception of what safe means. Right? So, March 8th meeting, you all will be having a conversation, and we will be with that meeting. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Parker so she can take us through. Just so you all know, for those of you who are new to the committee, the behavior education plan.
Yeah, I did. Actually, not good. Going out to physical clubs.
Yeah.
I can't remember if this came up or was just in my head from our conversations before. Were we ever talking about two people going at once to a club, maybe one person taking notes, one being engaged, or are notes going to be taken, of the responses, or how useful is it? How are we doing that, recording all this?
Yeah, if you have a partner that wants to go with you from the committee, by all means.
Okay, yeah.
Right. And if you don't, then it'll be whoever visits, take the notes and send them back to us. Thank you for that. Okay, so the behavior education plan is reviewed every year by CCP, and our recommendations and review goes back to the board. So there are some suggested changes this year, and Ms. Parker is going to take us through this.
Thank you so much. So we have a slide that Lisa's going to put up. Carla and Carla's going to come by and give everyone a handbook, because there are pages referred to here that go to our handbook, and I thought it would be easier, instead of you squinting at the screen, to actually be able to look at the handbook to see. This is a copy of our student handbook that everyone gets, and the behavior education plan is written inside of the handbook. So the task before us is to hear what the suggested modifications will be, and then I need to answer any questions that you may have about them. This is our opportunity to question or challenge, or make sure that we're looking at this with a equitable focus towards our students and our way of managing behavior while we are in this environment. One thing I'm going to do first, because you're going to hear about suggested changes in levels of response, I want to go over the levels first, because I know you all don't deal with this every day. And so it's important to have that in context as we talk about the different things that we're going to look at. So the behavior education plan is specifically built to have a response to specific interventions. Starting on page 42 is where we'll be. So that's the page you can turn to now. And it actually lists the levels there on page 42. So whereas before the code of conduct kind of charged offenses, the behavior education plan is supposed to be a response to a behavior that is seen. And so the response to the behavior is not just a one-sided thing that happens. There are oftentimes multiple things that happen when an incident occurs, but the levels here tell you how the deans read this manual and know where they can start when they have a response to different things. So level 1 is classroom managed. So anything that starts at a level 1 means it's addressed in the classroom first by the classroom teacher. Classroom teacher logs the interaction with the student. If that behavior continues to come back, a teacher can then refer a student for a level 2. And level 2 is actually, and 2 through 5 are actually handled through our dean's offices. Level 2 gives them the ability to have at a up to a 1-day in-school reflection, okay, as a accountability factor. In-school reflection here at our school replaced ISS, which is in-school suspension. We don't just sit students in a room to complete their work for the day. They actually run through a program where they are actually helped in talking through what occurred, figuring out what happened, who was involved, how harm may have been caused, who were the affected individuals or groups, if it's like the class, and then how they're going to actually rectify that situation to restore what was there before those things happened. So that is the program within ISR that a student sits through when they have a day in that area. A level 3 takes a student to a possible 1 to 3 days of ISR, depending on the infraction. And we'll talk more about that as we're going through the changes today. A level 4 brings into play an possibility of an out of school suspension, and it can be anywhere between 1 to 3 days, depending on the infraction. And then a level 5, which is the most intensive level that we have, is still an out of school suspension, but it brings into play more than 4 days and could possibly also lead to a recommendation for expulsion if it was something serious enough for that. So when you think level 5, think actual handgun on the premises. Like that's what I mean when I mean extreme, okay? Most things within our behavior education plan takes into account that adolescents make mistakes and make bad choices. And so we are oftentimes trying to educate and to make sure that students hear from us the expectation while in this place, and then responds accordingly. So there's, except for that extreme measure, I said, there's very little that starts here without a conversation with adults trying to shape a skill for a student as they're going through this, okay? So those are your levels. What you're gonna hear me talk about today are the suggested changes to the BEP. The BEP changes typically come from the deans who deal with the manual the most and are looking at how these things are affecting the students in terms of the responses that are happening with students. And they're suggesting in this document what things would be more helpful for students and more helpful for deans in trying to work with students to learn the skills necessary to be able to not repeat offenses or behavior within our school. So I'm going to jump into the document and then you will see where I'm going to point out pages as I go through. So I will read out loud as I'm going through this. And I'm also going to supply a rationale so that you know why that's there, okay? So the very first one is in our alcohol, drugs, and tobacco on page 43 section. And you are looking at the line that speaks to any drug other than marijuana, which is the one that's second from the bottom. As you can see, that one starts at a level 4 right now. Our concern with the drugs outside of marijuana that come into our school in large quantities are drugs that may show up on the premises that have devastating effects. I want you to think fentanyl, okay? That if given out to students in school and taken unsuspectedly could lead to beyond harm, death, okay? What's being asked for that, if you have large amounts of a substance that comes in other than marijuana, is a starting response level at a 5, okay? So imagine, again, large quantities, we're not talking about single thing coming in a student that has a different response that's in there. And as I go through these, if you have questions, write them down. I'm gonna go through them all and then we can come back and go through, but I want you to be able to digest them all, okay? The second one is under the disruptive and uncooperative behavior section on page 44. We have the very last line, which is a catch-all, and it is one that speaks to any serious misconduct that's not otherwise addressed in the behavior education plan. So as much as we have tried to be broad in our explanation, there are things that come up all the time that just we haven't written about because we just never thought we'd see anything like that, right? So we have this category that catches like anything that's not explicitly explained in, in its own section. The issue here is that it currently starts at a level 2, which means no matter what the serious misconduct is, the only thing that they can respond with is up to a 1 day of in-school reflection. And that does not always account for how serious this other misconduct could be. And so they're saying they would want this changed to a level 3 so that they had flexibility of that 1, but depending on what that misconduct is, it could be a 1 through 3, depending on what it was, okay? Number 3, in the disruptive and uncooperative behaviors, if you look at the third one from the top, it says failure to serve a detention, and it starts at a level 1. One of our teachers pointed out to me, detentions are not given in the classroom, in which case they cannot classroom manage it. Deans are give detentions to students, so it needs to switch to a level 2 instead of starting at a level 1, just because they don't initiate in the classroom. Okay, so that's number 3. Number 4 is page 44 with firearms and weapons. So we're looking specifically at the one that says a weapon other than a firearm or other gun or look-alike gun. This one came into play because we have had knives that have shown up on campus, and they have come in a variety of sizes. The good thing is we have not seen these things being used on anyone. So I always like to qualify. These are things found on the kids in their possession. Not wanting to guess why they are there, but they have not been used against another student. We still need to have a way of addressing that they should not be on the person. Like we don't allow them to bring weapons of any kind within the building. It currently right now starts at a level 3, which is in-school reflection. And the ask is that depending on the threat of this weapon, it's starting at 4 and then being able to escalate to a 5 if it continues in terms of this weapon being brought. Okay, and the knife was specifically brought up because they have seen so many differences in the blades of the knife in terms of the harm that could be caused. Yes, like number 5, false alarms. So this would be pulling the school fire alarm. Okay, currently, what happens when the alarm is pulled, the entire building has to be empty, including our students with significant disabilities, our daycare. They put all the little babies in a crib and then they have to roll the crib out no matter what the temperature is. And so the disruption to the community tends to be very large. The ask here is for where it starts at a level 3 response now, suggesting to modify that to a level 4 start instead. Okay. Next slide, Lisa. And we will come back to the slide when we come back to talk. I'm just laying them all out. 6 refers to gang activity. There has actually been a slight uptick in terms of students' declaration of gang activity. So I won't say that there's been any significant blowouts from it, but there has been more students' declarations showing up, speaking to other kids, throwing the language around. Currently, that has a response level of a 2, and the ask is that it would start at a 3 and then escalate to 4 and 5 if not changed in behavior in terms of the behavior showing up on campus. Please note though that gang activity, because the question came up as we were discussing these, well, if it's a fight, are we addressing it as a fight or are we addressing this as a gang activity if the student comes to that? If a student is in a fight, it would still be consequence as a fight. So it's not the assumption of this person must be in a gang and so that's why they're fighting. It's the presence of gang language and activity and grouping that's being declared there. Number 7 is in the inappropriate language and or expression section 46. We split up 2 of these, so the next 2, 7 and 8, we changed the language in terms of what was happening in terms of the language that was being used by a student. In 7, it used to say serious threats in this statement that's in the book in 46 right now, and we wanted to separate the threat, the level of threats. So we have some more serious threats that our staff, other students, and people have had to manage within the school. So we're separating out the different types of threats that they are. We want to lower the one that are idle and have a higher one when the threats are more significant and serious. So the one that's in the book now that says serious threats, we want to change the word from serious to just threats, including the use of social media to threaten someone or to cause a disruption, which starts at a 3. We want to lower that to start at a 2, and then it could escalate. But then we wanted to add the one beneath it that would now read as serious threats, including the use of social media to threaten bodily harm or suggest immediate risk that directly or indirectly jeopardizes the health, safety, or property of the school, school personnel, or other students. And we're suggesting that started at a 3. So a serious threat against those individuals versus an idle threat. And I'm sure Carla could give more examples of that when we come back around if we need to do that. Number 9 is the inappropriate use of technology, which can be found on page 47. We have had instances where a young person will take the device of another person and use that person's device to search for inappropriate content on the internet, like how to build a bomb, how to hide a bomb, and how to blow up a school, like that. We have a search mechanism on all of our devices that triggers an alert when that occurs. And then the deans get that alert and we instantly go down and we investigate. And what has happened is that in some cases, it has targeted students who might have been profiled to do, so take for instance, a student of Muslim religion who they took that person's computer on purpose to do this. So not malicious, but malicious, right? Exactly. Okay. So that's the kind of thing. Yes, because I try to give credit to the fact that they make bad choices sometimes, thinking that's funny, but not funny, right?
Parents are
Correct. Correct. So we are asking for that one, if we can have a second bullet, add to the current technology infraction. So we're actually adding this as a statement. This doesn't exist. We wanted to say accessing a district provided device issued to another person to administer threats and or search for harmful material, and that would start at a level 3. Okay. The last 2 items, 10 and 11, are put here to support our phone home policy that started this year. If everyone's familiar that in instructional spaces, students are expected to come in and to put their phones in the phone home, but they are not distracted by their devices while they're in class. The phone home committee suggested these 2. So these did not come from the dean, and they wanted these to support the work that they're doing with the phone homes. The first of which says the presence of a cell phone on a student's person, in their backpack, or otherwise in their physical possession is expressly prohibited during instructional time. And it starts with a level 1 because these are managed to begin with in the classroom by the teacher. And then the second one is the use of smartwatches, AirPods, or other listening devices, or any other non-educationally required device, electronic or otherwise, that detracts from and or disrupts the learning environment for any students during instructional time is expressly prohibited and may be subject to confiscation at the teacher's discretion. And then there's also some other devices that I put at the bottom that this might include. This is, as you can imagine, while phones are in the home, if I have my watch on, it still rings and texts and things like that. As well as it was still close enough for my AirPods to work if they are in the phone home. So that's where that one came from, okay? So those were all. I'm going to go back to the top to start taking questions that you may have for any of the items that you see, because we have to decide here, can these go forward or do we have questions on them? And if those are not, we got to figure that out here so that we can vote on it and decide if this is what the board will receive. So we're back at number 1, page 1.
Yeah, so
Oh, okay. Oh, I was gonna open the TV one. Okay, and then I open the floor for questions. And they can start wherever.
I have a general question. So thank you. First, this was helpful to help navigate this. Thank you for doing this. Regarding the levels, so 4 and 5 are where out of school suspension kicked in.
Correct.
Could you speak to any kind of reflection that happens in conjunction with that, or is it?
And Carla can give specifics in terms of how responses stack on to one another. Because getting a 1 day in school or a 2 day out of school does not mean that there is not the conversation, the mediation, the restorative conversation to help mend the environment so that when the student does return. We try as much as possible not to exclude a student from the learning environment because we know that exclusive punishments have not worked in the past. The out of school suspension at this point, in terms of the number of days, there is a re-entry plan that's involved with that. So that students know that after the however many number of days have been served, you come back in and there is a reintegration plan. There have also been, for depending on what the infraction has been, conversations with a parent, like we've brought in groups of students and their parent, and we've sat down, deans and myself, and had conversations around what has happened, what we're going to do to make sure that that does not happen, so that we're making sure that that has been resolved, and then bringing those students in some cases back together before they go to their first period classes so that we can make sure that they are ready to re-enter the environment in a way that is conducive for learning to occur in the space. Carly,
We also, when students are suspended out, and I just want to point out that we don't oftentimes suspend students out. Our numbers for out of school suspension are minimal. But when we have to suspend the student out due to the nature of the behavior, we always bring that student to either the student's IEP team or the PSS team. And the PSS team consists of the dean, the social worker, and the counselors. And in that space, we create what's called a student behavior support plan. And that plan details and specifies which person is going to make frequent contacts with each student and what service you're going to provide as part of their reintegration. That typically lasts across the remainder. So we have to see improved metrics from their students for the support plan to kind of diminish it or kind of reduce the services. But as they come back into the building, we meet with them as a team. We talk about the services that we're going to provide. We solicit their input of what is it that you feel like you need? How can we help you better to make better decisions? What kind of support do you need in this space? What are your triggers? We oftentimes introduce Mr. Diggs and bring in his element of expertise as well. So when students are out, we do really capture them and put a lot of supports in place to maintain them, help them become stabilized, help them be able to make better decisions. We are also looking at introducing a new support and service to the building, and it's called Third Millennium. So we're in the research process of this right now because we were begging for it. And Linda listened to us a little bit. It's like, just get some research and come to there. But Third Millennium is it's an internet-based program, but it provides curriculum to students on managing healthy relationships, vaping, smoke, like the things that we're seeing our kids, physical aggression, anger management. Those we will be able to provide our students with, by accessing their devices if they are suspended outside of the building, so that we can continue to provide some character training, some support, some reflective moments for them to be able to really think about when they're outside the building, the spaces, how the space is being impacted and what's causing them to respond the way they're responding. We haven't used a system like that before in this space, but we're researching and we're seeing where it's having some really good impacts in other spaces in our local area with students. So it's something that we wanted to look at as a possible option for us.
What's it called again?
Third millennium.
And just for further context, you heard Carla say we don't typically suspend out of school. From the beginning of school to the 7th, what's today, the 8th, so to yesterday, we had 33 out of school suspensions. So that's from August to now. That's how many has happened this school year thus far.
Is that, if we're looking at a percentage of the population of students and to the number of out of school suspensions and relative size schools, is that a comparable number?
We are pretty low given the number of students we have in our school. So given that we have 3,000, that is considerably low.
And also note in that number, a good percentage of that was one incident that involved multiple students. So I think maybe 11 students possibly were involved in one incident where they were out of school suspended. So we're really looking at 22 out of school suspended. Yeah, other offenses. I'm sure that was multiple.
Well, these are just the infractions. So that's counting the infraction, not the kids.
Yes. Okay, so I'm feeling like maybe I should know this, but I don't. Okay, so the whole, maybe this is in years past, the whole Menta program that
Great
I
question.
thought was out of school suspension, but usually for more than a few days. How does that fit in? Are we still using them? How does it fit into all this?
I just, you know what, I was feeling very good about, oh, yes, that's a great question. And then I'm like, oh, we're live, but I'm gonna say it anyway, because I have to say the truth. I have worked since for the last couple of years, because I'm asking more questions as to how is it serving our students. And I am concerned. So, because we started to use Menta when we used to suspend more because we had a code of conduct, I was told that there were some wraparound services and the students were receiving these, and I'm concerned. So I took to the board last year a split program where we didn't just use Menta, but I had conversations with Ombudsman, which is a program that is also alternative education, and it is about credit retrieval for students who are credit deficient in the hopes of making sure that they can get their diploma from our school. We send students to Menta when they have a suspension as an alternate to suspension, so they don't have to sit home and not have an adult there to assist with the work. But that was when they had 10 days out. You know, they were doing 10 days, 5 days. When you're out for 2 days, 3 days, it's not as relevant. And so the kids aren't even taking advantage of it as they should. They might go one day and then not go the other day. Or if they have 2, and that's only if they have multiple. So I'm not seeing the benefit of having them sit in this new environment where they don't know anyone to do their work. And so I am hoping to do something different. Yes.
Other questions? And thank you for being here on this night. Thank you, Dr. Mead. I actually have a question. What's the process? So if drugs are found on a student, right? Because this is changing to a 5, which I understand the rationale that you said, because you know there are drugs that can put people in. But what's the process if drugs are found on a student?
Sure.
People are taking people's laptops to put stuff on it, I want to just make sure that.
So if a student is involved, if they're vaping or there's, we had a parent call the other day and said the student took my marijuana. So there's a reason for us to initiate a search. We take the student into an office, a private location, with a partner. We conduct the search of their property. We ask them to empty their pocket the first thing. We contact the parent, let the parent know that we're conducting the search, and we let the parent know what we may or may not have found in the student's possession, depending on the amount. So if we find a student who's in possession of a marijuana vape, that student, and it's their first offense, so there are always some things, if that's that student's first offense, then we're contacting the parent, we're having conversations with the student, we're connecting the student with supports, and then we're assigning that student an in-school suspension, in-school reflection. We are also making, social work follow-up and making a referral to Rosecrans for an assessment for the student. That's on the low end of it. But in the event where we had a student who had fentanyl in their possession, that we are following that same process up until the one day of in-school reflection. We are notifying parents and asking them to be in the space. We have to contact the police. The police does come into the building and talk with our students in our space and our presence, or until the parents get here, whichever the parent prefers. We then still have to offer the student support and services. See that kid's in trouble, that kid is that they need support. So we are realigning the supports. We are making decisions about where the student's going to serve the out of school time. And then we are again addressing, making referrals for Rosecrans, for substance abuse assessment, and then supporting the family through whatever the police process is. Typically, we don't enjoy having the police come into our space for things like that, but because of the nature of the drug, we have to do that. And then especially in quantities that are bulk. So our experience was a bulk quantity. RB says anything that's more than 3 grams. So that's the nature of the process.
When you all refer to Rosecrans, it's on parents to cover the cost of that?
No, that is a cost that is absorbed by the district. The parent does have the right to refuse, and to be quite honest, in this space, parents do refuse to have their student undergo the assessment. Pretty often.
I'm gonna also say that we have a person who comes into the building on once a week and does the initial screening for the student. If that screening shows that there is additional help that's necessary, a referral is given. I went and spoke to the individual because I wanted to ask the same question, like, how is it paid for? If a student has Medicaid, it is covered under that. If the student does not have Medicaid, it does encounter a need for the parent insurance. And as Carla has said, we have encountered parents who have denied the assistance for several reasons. I don't know that it's always for income, but just denied the help for the student. The assessor told me there are ways to kind of push the issue to get it still, like, we need that insurance information for your child to get this help. But there is a cost beyond our screening if there seemed to be a need for addition.
I have something, not sure how to, just feel a little uncomfortable with language. I've heard a couple times tonight. The expression serving pain sounds like prison to me. And they worked in residential treatment. We went through the whole process.
Yeah, because I can't.
You can't hear me? Okay. Okay, I just was commenting on having heard the expression of serving time. and, responded just, uncomfortably. And where that's coming from, it sounds like prison. And also, I worked in a residential treatment center. We went through a whole process some years back to change that language because we don't. So. that's kind of the
Yeah, I was having one language, he's still on the word offense, right, the first offense, the second offense. Like, I know that we are, I know that we need to have things in place, and things, you know, what's happening in the world is happening to us, so this is a larger community issue. But I do feel like if we are cultivating a space that students have the opportunity to restore and repair and heal, that the language that we use doesn't.
Yeah, those are very good points. I'm trying to look to see too, if that was in anything I read, so I can make sure that that's not there. I do know that there's one thing here that says serving a detention. That's not the one though, is it?
You know,
Serving-
I
okay.
heard serving time. Just in the conversation.
Okay. Did you hear that from me?
Yes.
Can you
Both
tell
of
me?
them, each of them.
Oh, I don't recall saying that, but thanks for bringing that to my attention.
Yeah.
Yes. Mhm. Thank you.
Do you have other questions
Thank
about
you
this
for
first one?
receiving
I'm getting clear on the cell is 7:30. And we have 11 of these to move through. So I just want to make sure these are done. Even though I think, are we gonna vote on each one, each one?
Is that what you'd like to do? I mean, we
I
can.
really would, because
Okay.
this one I definitely don't want to. move forward.
Okay. Yeah.
So, is there any, are there any other questions or thoughts about this first one? And so, is anyone want to move to support this renewal? I would like to support this.
Second.
In order for our voting to be expeditious as well, I'm just gonna ask, is there anyone in opposition with this?
I guess, because this means suspension, I mean expulsion, right?
No, it could mean that, it says may be, Linda, you wanna speak to that?
Sure. It is included in this category, but it is only a recommendation. So remember that any recommendation for expulsion has to have documentation on how you arrive there. So it could never just be students just came with an excess amount, like there has to be, what was the plan? What was the different things that were done to mediate, make sure that people happen again? And then it only goes into as a recommendation because that has to go to the board. So it's not an instant expulsion. It just could be a recommendation for an expulsion if it escalates and continues.
And I just wanted to say, because it doesn't name any particular drugs, and some, other than just another drug, other than marijuana, and using the example of fentanyl, which is saying firearms. So, there are other drugs. Oh, did I do it again? Okay, so what I was saying was the example used, as we've been talking with fentanyl, which is like saying fire. It's like we're all scared of it, almost in any quantity. But there are other drugs besides. There's not just marijuana and there's fentanyl. There's marijuana and maybe some other drugs that I can't name any, but I'm sure there are. The kids come to school with.
But I'm thinking, and I'm curious, it's because of the quantity, right?
Correct.
So if they're bringing, if regardless of what the other drug is, first of all, they're all legal. And marijuana is illegal for people under 18 to 21.
21.
I'm not involved in that.
I'm thinking sometimes, well, I say they're illegal, like, because they're the quantity, and some drugs are, like, I'm thinking, Ativan, or, Ritalin or something, yes, prescription that sometimes, kids might have one, or it's their parents, I think they're taking.
If the student, but just being an educator, if the student has a prescribed medication, the school has to be notified of it in advance, and so we would know. And if the student shows up with a little one, but they don't have a prescription for it, sounds wrong.
Yes.
You know, so I think, I just wanted to
Okay,
to express
yeah, okay,
that, and I'm also very mindful of like explicit, illicit drugs in any capacity, those quantities would be alarming in the building. I know it's not, so in my opinion, anyone. wants to say this? Thank you.
And do know that marijuana was exited from this, even though it is still illegal for youth. It is a legal drug in this state, and so their encounters with it will be more probable than they should have, like bottles of prescription medication that don't belong to them or things of that nature. And so and we also are recognizing where they may get very, very ill from a large amount of marijuana, it's not going to kill. They will be very, very sick. And so that is why that is exited out of this category as well.
Okay, so anyone in opposition will listen to this one? And no opposition? We'll do that this week. Moving on to the second one, any questions about the this one that allows it changes to a level 3, and there's some questions that I have again that are about the level 3.
Yes.
Because changing some things to a level 3 really does seem like it's escalating it immediately, right? Like it's, you do this, you go on to here. I'm open to questions. I don't really have a lot of comments. There are no questions that we have now.
Can you not move to a 3 after 2?
Yes, you can.
So the necessary go to 3 right away when you start the.
So the reason that we were asking for it to begin at a level 2 is because essentially, begin at level 3 is because essentially you can apply the same element at a level 3 in assigning one day. But you cannot, given the nature of the student's behavior, we were asking for that range 1 to 3 days, given the nature of the behavior that was demonstrated. So at a level 2, you can only give 1 day. If we were able to start at a level 3, we would have a range of 1 to 3 days based upon the nature of the behavior.
This is determined.
Like of a serious misconduct, exactly.
Right, so all the reason why I follow with that one is the subjectivity of it. And just because the current gains we have, do that say it wouldn't, right? Because I mean.
I'm right.
I don't know, right? Seriously, but it's when you put things into, things into paper and policy, right? I look at not just current, I look at the future too as well. So change it to a 3 if you have a bias toward certain students or different students. You might just say you're at a 3 and go to 3 instead of 1. So I think it's more controls as opposed to going right to a 3. I'm not saying the current administration would, but this written policy then helps with the gate for us. And
it also doesn't, and I think I hear what you're saying. And when we were thinking about this, I did have to kind of pull myself back and try to look at it from a parent's perspective, from the student's perspective, and from the dean's perspective. Overwhelmingly, I feel and I don't want to speak for the entire team, but I feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility to the safety of this school. And every day, there are things happening in this space that cause our kids to not be safe.
I'm just, when I see random like that, it's so vague to me. Because I don't know, it could be a number of things from saying you look ugly to something more serious, right? I just don't know what that is. So it was broken down more about people, but it's such a reason, almost isn't big as numbers, but could be anything. Or as that is concerned.
I agree, because any serious misconduct not otherwise addressed within the BEP, that feels very, very subjective.
So that's the language that's already there. So we didn't create that.
So.
And I think it was created to be, I think Linda described it as a catch-all, but you just don't know what you get in that space. So that's the way that it's written, that it was approved to be written in the DEP is what causes us to ask for that, because there are things that we never thought we would see in the building that is not going to be specific in any other place, that we don't have a space to manage the students' behavior. So that's, that's
You break that out.
I was just
Is
thinking
it
like.
separate?
to, what's,
I don't know.
Like, so there's another one in here that has something very similar, right, that you decided to do it in levels. Based on what it was, could this be one of those areas that happens with? Because could you identify more? What was, because you say that you're seeing specific behaviors that would require some additional, like, if that changed to level 3, would it be possible to identify that a little more clearly?
we could likely edge out, yeah.
The clause at the end that's stating directly or indirectly jeopardizes the health, safety, or property of the school. From my vantage point, that's speaking to, we're talking about some serious behaviors here. And I just want to acknowledge Carla, because I detected like a note of emotion in your voice, and I empathize with that. So I see this as a necessary tool that our deans, they didn't just come up with this from thin air. They are dealing with some stuff, and they're looking for some tools to help them more effectively deal with some behaviors. And so I would just like to advocate on their behalf.
Thank you, that's why it's so important to have educators on this committee and who are in the building experiencing what the school is on a daily basis. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Comments? We might be, but we're gonna go on it first.
I'll just say that, I think that, I can't remember what was called before, but I think there's always a section that deals with kind of the et cetera. You know, the unforeseen, and I think we always have to leave that space. I do think, I can see a breadth in terms of, is this a behavior that might be a one-on-one personal thing, or is it something where the whole school is being put in jeopardy? I feel like it would be nice to see if we can kind of break this out, at least on one level. And then I think for all of these, again, I'm a numbers person, it gives me a bit of a sense that if I had a better sense of how frequently we were seeing some of these things happen, it would give me a bit more confidence in saying we need to make a change in the system.
Please, go ahead.
I question breaking it down, because if these are things that the deans, and I believe the deans, right, are saying they never would have expected to see in the behavioral education building anyways, I think it sounds to me almost impossible to break it down, because what are we breaking it down into? And while I do think that this could be used to be harmful, no doubt, right? I also think that we have to put some trust in the professionals who are in that space to do that job. And when there are issues, there always are issues, addressing those issues, right? But I think to me, putting trust in the professionals tells me this is what they need to address situations, and I think this is what they need. And I also just wonder that if we're thinking about how we're treating students and how we're taking students, right? I think that it's important for us to have the ability to give the 1, 2, or 3 versus the 1 based on severity. And I just think, again, breaking that out is not going to be easy and not going to be possible.
Yeah, I would agree, having worked in a school space and not in this era now, post-COVID, when things are really gotten to be really extra difficult, in my understanding. You can't predict it. We haven't seen it before, you can't predict it. I can't see it being able to be broken down, and I think for the safety of everybody, you have to have the flexibility of it. But I think it'd be hard to predict.
You need someone who would support or.
I move in support.
A second.
Anyone in opposition to us reading this? Hearing none, we can move forward with that one. I want to add just a real quick comment. I know it's necessary to get through and we have a lot more, but I just want to add the comment that our systems that are dealing students of color, specifically Black students, are people that we trust and that we know can do this, and we know systemically it still happens. So I'm mindful of that piece for us, and that we continue to use the ones that we've been using to make sure that we're, which I know that you already do this, right? I know that you do this for a fact, that we're making sure that it's not, that we're eliminating any target, as much targeting, any targeting that we can, and for students of color. And I really want to just again thank the educators in the building, because your lived experience is invaluable. So thank you. So the third one, or are there others that have a lot of questions? The third one was.
It's just a change in response level because
Oh,
it
because-
doesn't exist at
Yeah.
one.
It doesn't exist at one. So anyone opposed to us approving number 3? Okay, and then number 4. I have a question about the significance of the size of the knife.
And that rationale was not changed. There was a new suggested descriptor that I asked about because it included knife of 2.5 inches or longer. I took that out, but didn't change the rationale. So now what's being asked is just what you see there, can that be changed from a 3 to start at a 4? So a weapon other than a firearm or other gun or look-alike gun. Could it start at 4 instead of 3? So out instead of in.
Right, so when we originally framed it, we were framing it really specifically in that because we're seeing an uptick in that being in our building. But as we talked about it and tried to flesh through it, I think the message that we really want to communicate is that we don't want weapons in our buildings. So we etched out specifically.
Yes.
So, and I to me, it was about, I don't care how you know, because I don't want to be nice.
That's what,
that's what-
exactly, that's what.
That was the
we-
rationale at the kind of talk, it's like, wait a minute.
Because
Yeah, somebody's like, but Linda, an inch, and I said, I don't be stabbed by any of them. So I'm thinking, if once you start stabbing, it doesn't matter what it is, you know?
But I like
Yeah.
I have just a question. I have a question. I think you've already said this, can you say it again? What other processes besides, you know, when they get suspended from school, what else is happening besides you're just asked?
Well, none of our students are just out, so we're still, even when students who had out of school suspensions were sent to mental, we were still going there in that space to meet with them, to have restorative conversations, to get them ready to have that conversation when they come back into the building. We were still providing social work services to those students as well. When they come back into this space, we do sit and have the reintegration meetings. We can go take those students to our PSS teams and put student behavior support plans in place that is going to ensure that across a span of time, the social worker is connecting, the counselor is connecting, if need, the trauma interventions is connecting, the SPED team is connected. So we're putting all of those in places as well. Just kind of a little bit more intentionally making sure that they're happening to make sure that kids are coming back into the space feeling supported and prepared to move forward.
How about family connections or involvement with parents or guardian
So we bring
participation?
parents in, we bring parents and when there is an incident, we bring parents in to discuss the nature of the incident. And to discuss, because we also need to hear how parents are feeling about the student's behavior and how parents are feeling about our responses to the student's behavior. we try to partner and collaborate with the parent. We will link the parent with Mr. Garland, should there need to be some additional supports that are for the family. We link the parent through our social workers with additional resources within the community. We always use Oak Park Township and some other resources that are available. So parents are very much a part of the collaboration and the planning process. They just don't get to make the discipline decision, but they are very much a part of the reintegration process and communicating the supports that they may need also to help the student make some benefits.
And please note that anything that has an advancement, like from a 3 to a 4 or 4 to a 5, you cannot get to a recommendation for expulsion if the strategies that were put in place, like the behavior, are not followed to the T, so that you can show we put these supports in place, this is what's done, and this was the result. This didn't work, we tried this, what, that all has to happen before a recommendation of expulsion is even considered.
Now, I'm just, for some reason I'm flashing, like, I think that should be in the school. The parents, they were in the school, having a meeting with the school, and then the kid just goes out and goes. Then same day, not that much, and.
With several people saying there was a weapon, the same thing happened with the 6-year-old who shot the teacher. Somebody said, 4 people said that he has a weapon on him, and it was not investigated. Like, we have to take the claim serious and at least do the due diligence to figure out what's happened.
Well, and I guess too, part of my concern is that there are just so many weapons. Probably in our community too, so, and the parents sometimes aren't. Always worried about these things.
Sometimes the parents don't know. Sometimes my phone call to the parent is the first time it's being brought to their attention that their student is involved in something of that nature. Sometimes our parents really just don't.
And I do want to be honest that one of the things I took to the culture of the building committee the other day is that we take for granted that we think common knowledge is common. And we are seeing more and more communications from parents that are saying, what is our problem with this? This is okay. Like, why are you harassing our child about this? And I'm like, they can't smoke on this campus. They can't, like, these are just, you can't. And so we have to work in partnership, but it can't be, but they smoke at home, stop bothering here. We're going to bother here. So then now we have to talk about how we can maybe talk to them about how before school, after school, you use your time, because in this building, these are some things you just aren't going to be able to do.
But that means like anxiety about this issue, especially one.
I have a question about weapons. That include objects, like maybe a pencil and like compass, used as a weapon.
So the BEP does not specify specifically what that weapon is, but if it is used as a weapon, so you could pick up this chair, which is meant to be a chair to hold for a person to sit in. But if you pick up that chair and you swing that chair at me and you make contact, then you're using it as a weapon. Yeah.
And if you'll notice in the categories, we talk about having it and using it. So there's a separate category when you use the chair or the compass. And then there's this one, which if we saw a compass in a student's backpack, we would not automatically assume that it was a weapon, because it is a tool, an educational tool as well.
I'm thinking we have 13 minutes.
And remember to, like, this is going to the board in April, and I brought it this month because I thought some of the conversation may extend, which means next month we'd have to pick it up if we want to do that way.
So let's continue and get as far as we can, and if we take the conversation and finish it up. Okay, so David, would like to move that we approve. Second. Seconds, thanks. Anyone opposed? let's go into the file. Any questions about this? Going along. I just have been in school when it's been done, because, you know, kindergartners don't realize that they're not supposed to pull that, like, and having to empty the entire building, and then, especially, I'm not in high school, they just use school as high as opposed to me, but I can tell you, getting, pre-K to five out, and back in, it's a huge disruption. My question is, wouldn't, I don't understand shifting it to a 4 though, but what is it gonna, what's gonna be different thinking of a 4?
What about the behaviors gonna be different?
Yeah.
Well, so because it's a huge disruption today, that was our primary focus on how many, what it pulls away from the learning environment, all of the babies that we have to lift, and get them out of the building safely. Our teens kids, our kids who have sensory issues really struggle. I mean, we had kids laid out on the grass across the street. Like it's a huge disruption to the day.
The difference is between a 3 and a 4 is that this one could go directly to out of school.
Yep, it would start in and out.
It would start the conversation again as it was supposed to make. With that family next to it. And any consideration given if the student has ever done anything ever before?
So the BP is progressive. So if you've not had any infractions, is that the word? I'm scared to talk now. Okay, give me the word. I get infractions, that's better than, okay. If the student hasn't had, and this is what I want everyone to also note, when you look at page 42, I believe, not that I know this by heart, but every response to a infraction starts with a restorative conversation. There's a restorative process. It may not end in a suspension at all, or into a reflection. But I forget what your initial question was now. Remind me the initial.
Yeah, no, if the it was just about it to go straight to high school.
Right, so it may not because the BEP is progressive. And so if the student hasn't had any infractions, of course, that's something that we take into consideration when we're looking at the BEP and how we apply the discipline. But we don't look to go harsh. We look to educate and try to teach a skill before we even, we have kids that we've been talking to, they're doing the same thing, they've not had an infraction. Like we're trying to build skills before we even go to discipline the student.
So the question is, if a person pulls a fire alarm, is the first thing they've done. Because she's saying right now, if we switch it to this, they'd have, the lowest we could go in terms of a response would be a 1 day out of school versus in school to progress up to out.
So if it's their first offense, and yeah, they will have 1 out.
And it's still good. They will go out, right? I don't know if there are still adolescents, as much as it's rest today, there's still young people learning how to not make mistakes. And I also just want to echo what Lincoln said, like next time, maybe next year when we do this, it would be helpful to know how many are frequent. And some of the rationale is great. I really appreciate that, but with more details would be helpful.
Yeah, and I'm getting mixed up, it's forgiven. But I think when I look at this, my inclination, and maybe this is a societal thing, is that I'm looking at these levels as minimums, but actually I should be looking at them as ceilings. Am I getting that right? Or that's kind of one thing, because I think in my head when I see 4, I'm thinking that this is like an automatic 1 day, and that's not what that means. It means up to. Okay, and I think that's just sorry. So that's one thing, and then just the kind of, and I think in terms of the policy, I am definitely, trusting and deferring that you all are kind of making these changes based on things that you see in the building. I'm in the building probably the least of most of the people. But I think as we think through this notion of the numbers is because there's policy and there's implementation. And I think right now we're being asked to make decisions about policy without having good clarity on implementation. And I think being able to do this with numbers helps us get a better sense of the implementation.
I do not want to make this to agree, but I don't know if it was the community feels or this is a collective discussion here.
So can I clarify, because I thought you were saying that the 1 day would be the minimum, but now you're talking about it's a ceiling that's the maximum, so I'm confused now. What,
So a
cool.
level 4 means that it could be in the range of out of school from 1 to 3 days.
Could be.
Correct, it starts there, so
Starts-
it's
It's
starts at 1 of school.
Okay.
So when we say, well, I can give them an in-school, that's not on the table for it. It would have to start if we're gonna respond with this with a 1 day or 2 or 3.
May, the language in the DEP is may, so it may result in a 1 day. So as Carla was saying, it could be a restorative conversation and then it's done. It may result in 1 day, it doesn't make it say it's automatically gonna be a 1 day. I think we have to keep that in mind. That's not my use. So now it's confusing.
So we utilize the BP, and I think maybe the language is confusing, and maybe that's something we can clean up. But if it's a level 4, 1 day is where it starts.
If you assign it as that number 5. Right, so it's number 5, it starts at 4.
If it's
Right.
if oh, you're talking about number 5.
So number 5.
Right,
if that
so if it
happens-
starts at a level 4, the minimum response is a 1 day out of school suspension.
Right, that's what I'm
So
saying.
we'll start.
Wilson.
So I know the DP says May, but I think maybe that's something.
I think it was mostly clarified. I assumed that when it said May, that it meant if this conversation fails, the kid doesn't say sorry, whatever, then it would advance to the out of school.
So
But is it,
So
there's a
issue,
conversation regardless, and it's also a suspension regardless of the outcome of that conversation.
correct.
Okay, then I think I would have to agree that I don't really agree with that being a level 4 infraction. I think at the point, we're supposed to be restorative, and I think that's kind of a purely punitive measure, because I don't think them being the in-school reflection, I think that would be sufficient. It's not like a knife where they're clearly posing a threat to the school community, need to be taken out of that community for a little bit. I think that the in-school reflection is sufficient for that infraction.
I also think that if you have a 3, you have the ability to do some additional, ISR. For the level 3.
All days in school.
Right, and these 4 functions needed, right, so that the student who one time pulls it, never did anything else, isn't gonna automatically get a 1 day suspension, that's gonna go on their record and say, right? So, anyone, I'm hearing, let's not move it to a, let's not approve that move to a 4.
Are we gonna take a vote?
That's what I'm asking, yeah.
So I'd like to was. this report.
I will second.
Okay, so we can take a vote on this one. So all in favor of moving it to a 4?
Aye.
Can you do hands on each one? So
You want me to do a roll call?
Yeah, do that, Lisa. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so this is changes to number
5.
5.
Number 5.
Okay,
And we're voting to approve it.
yes to approve it, and no if you're opposed to it. Like that for. Yes or no? Yes to approve it, yes. Yes to approve the change. Dr. Chandler, yes or no?
No.
Mr. Cogman? Yes or no?
Yes.
Mr. Diggs, yes or no?
Yes.
Mr. Drews, yes or no?
No.
Ms. Grimes, yes or no?
No.
Ms. Harris, yes or no?
No.
Mr. Henry, yes or no?
No.
Ms. McGee, yes or no?
Yes.
Ms. Parker, yes or no?
I don't think I should vote.
Absent. Dr. Starks Turner, yes or no?
No.
Ms. Stevens, yes or no?
No.
Ms. Wilson Roy, yes or no?
Yes.
Ms. Williams, you want to vote?
Sure.
Yes or no? Those have it. 7-6.
Did you go? I'm not.
She's not official. Unfortunately.
Official to us.
Okay, so the notes have it right.
We know it's have it.
We'll talk about that later. We're about to leave at 8 o'clock and I know JP got students. What I want to say is that what I heard really clearly was that the educators felt like this would be a great move, that this was an appropriate move. I heard you. And at the same time, I'm highly conscious of a student, that one student who actually does it as a big friend and has never done anything, and then their record is marked. That's where my thought process is on that. And I really don't want that to happen to a student if it can be. But more good, but if it's, if it is progressive, so if there's more happening and it warrants it, I can see more, but I don't want to start there. A young person, a young adult. It's the appropriate word.
Young adults.
Young adults. Okay, thank you. So,
I'm assuming that we're also going to be going with part of our March discussion, so finishing up this work. I would like to make a request of the members of the committee that are not in the school community. I really would like for you to visit our school community at some point during the day, particularly our lunch periods. I'd like for you to walk around our hallways. I'd like for you to walk around our student commons. I'd like for you to be able to, next time we go into this conversation, have a very clear picture in your mind of what our school community currently feels like. And I don't intend that with like this ominous tone, like you're just gonna see destruction everywhere. That's not what I'm saying. But I do want you to have some clarity, like have a sense of reality, have a sense of being over on the first floor by the door exits, where students are constantly leaping through the door at all times of the day, not just the alarm. So I really would like to make that request. Please come here, come for a lunch period, walk around the hallways. Thank you.
and I do believe that can be arranged, right, Lisa?
Yes, it can. Just let me know.
So it's a really great request. You don't know if you're not able to do it. Okay, so
Presentation. Okay.
8:02, I would welcome a motion to adjourn.
Before we adjourn, can I just make sure that, I don't know that they got the other slide, but maybe if people have that slide 6 through 10, you can have it. So the next time you'll come, that way you'll have time to digest more.
So do you want me to send it with the next agenda in March when I send it out?
Is that what we should do, wait until the agenda?
In March, thoughts? Would you rather have the information sooner? Or is it okay if we send it with the agenda in March?
Oh,
Okay.
Okay, so I'll send the slide tomorrow, and you guys can review it, and then I'll send it out again with the agenda. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
I can't motion.
We need a motion. Thank you all so very much.